Peter Morris says the $10 million investment is an opportunity Hunter businesses must seize. Former disappointments such as losing the frigates contract and an unfulfilled election promise to relocate the Canberra-based Australian Maritime Safety Authority to Newcastle are ancient history.
I firmly believe that we will be better off in terms of the number of jobs, the strengthening of business in this region, by letting the Maritime Safety Authority go to Canberra.
The $10 million will go to refurbishing the Civic Theatre and development of a convention centre, Williamtown Airport civil facilities. Cessnock gets a $50,000 boost, with half the funding earmarked for an industrial development centre. The Industry Development Centre is to be a one-stop shop where companies and small business alike can go and seek advice and current research on how to improve their business. The centre is to be built somewhere in the Hunter region. Mr Morris says ideally near Newcastle. He also adds that promoting local business is not the centre's only role.
The Industry Development Centre will have the role of looking across Australia to identify businesses, firms that could benefit from relocation here to this region.
Mr Morris hopes the centre's services will be in place by the end of this year. As for the Civic Centre, refurbishing work on the main auditorium is due to begin in July. Upgrading Williamtown Airport civil facilities should also start soon. Funds allocated to Cessnock's Plant Operator Training School will be directly injected to improving facilities. Mr Morris believes the benefits of this investment will filter through to all sectors of the community and help the world discover the hunter. Catherine Lamond, NBN News. When the weather is too hot in Cairns, where she has her own teaching studio, Enid Hossinger travels around Australia teaching her ancient art form. In the 16th century, artists of the day in Germany decorated wooden furniture and crockery. This week, Enid has been passing on this old style to members of the Country Comfort Folk Art Group in Foster.
I started off initially when I saw the art form painted by investigating it in Europe. And then I found out that there were basics, techniques of painting this art form, so I taught myself the brush strokes, and then I brushed up by taking classes with teachers, and from there on I self-developed. Why do folk art? I think we all need a little escape sometime, and sometimes there's a point in one's life where you feel that you want to further some sort of, or achieve another sort of ability. And it does not only, of course, satisfy in being able to become creative, but it also, of course, gives you a wonderful opportunity of being able to take it into a business.
Gosford City Council spends nearly $1 million a year on maintaining sports facilities. It only recoups 14% of that from fees charged for field use.
In this economic climate, it's very important that we laterally think.
So to cut council's losses, it's proposing sporting groups form 530A management committees. These would run the sporting facilities and cover maintenance costs.
There'll be a lot more of the old neighbourhood watch syndrome come in there. They'll look after their own facilities and probably do a lot more for themselves.
The Mayor says the proposal will help fast-track ground improvements because clubs will be able to do it themselves instead of having to wait for council. To help sporting groups raise revenue, council will allow them to seek sponsors. Under the proposal, the management committee can lease out signs on fences to sponsors at a cost of $1,000 for 2 years. Some sponsors may also be allowed to name a facility like a grandstand after their company.
If anyone who's out in the street looking for sponsorship now will find it extremely difficult to find that money.
And there's another catch.
Everything excluding tobacco and alcohol should be the prerogative of the particular groups, but the council will resolve whether in fact they are allowed to entertain alcohol advertising.
Sporting groups will be meeting later this month to further discuss council's proposal. Catherine Lamond, NBN News. Currently, 180 Waterside Workers Federation members are employed in Newcastle Port. These are shared among 4 organisations. Conost employs 16 permanent workers, Port Waratah has 27, Strait Patrick 35, with the remainder in a supplementary pool which is run by Steve Doring Employers Australia Limited. The plan of the Waterside Workers Federation is to shed 3,000 jobs nationally. 76 are earmarked in Newcastle. The bulk of that quota is expected to be achieved through voluntary early retirements. In Newcastle, 76 of the 180 members are eligible for the early retirement. The catch is they can't lodge an application until an enterprise-based agreement is passed. At today's meeting, members were informed of and voted to accept Port Waratah and Strait Patrick's enterprise-based agreements.
That's security of employment with it. As long as the stevedoring companies remain there, they've got a job there.
Both propose to increase permanent staff members, Strait Patrick by 3, Port Waratah by 16. The 2 companies would then have the option of calling on the pool for extra staff. The companies say this will reduce costs.
We've always had our permanent labour force of the same size, so that cost will remain. But the additional labour that we use now will only be paid when they work, as opposed to 7 days a week, whether they're employed or not.
Output is also expected to benefit.
Their productivity will increase because they've got the availability of working longer hours, even including the working of double headers.
Today's vote will now go to the Waterfront Industry Reform Authority early next week. If ratified, the enterprise agreements are expected to be implemented next month. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
Over 1,200 entries were received for the one-day carnival in Tamworth, with swimmers coming from the Hunter Valley, the far and mid-north coast and from all parts of the northwest New England region. Ages ranged from 6th through to Open Division, with competition keen in all races. It's one of the last major carnivals of the year, with everyone out to try and qualify for the Australian Championships. Also in Tamworth, 53 of the best skeet shooters in the country were hard at work enjoying themselves. Most of us would recognise clay pigeon shooting, but what is skeet shooting?
Skeet shooting single barrel, basically, whereas the other disciplines you're allowed to have 2 shots at it. Skeet shooting is also close range. Skeet shooting was developed in America probably 80 years ago to simulate field shooting, and that's basically what skeet shooting is.
Over $4,500 in trophies were on offer to the entrants from Brisbane and all parts of New South Wales, and there wasn't a shortage of crack shots.
The standard competition is very good. We've got 4 national champions on the ground, and that also includes the current national champion, Mr. Scott Wright.
More than 500 Air Force personnel representing 4 squadrons have been pounding the tarmac at RAF Base Williamtown in rehearsal after rehearsal for the big day. The Duke of Edinburgh will be present to congratulate 75, 76 and 77 squadrons on their 50th anniversaries. It's the biggest parade ever likely to be staged at the base, and it has to be just right. The squadrons rehearse throughout today and they'll do it all over again tomorrow. At the moment, almost any attire will do. Blankets are doubling for squadron banners, but on Friday it will be all spit and polish and perfection. More than 1,000 people, including hundreds of war veterans, are expected at the event, but senior officers admit the presence of the Duke will put extra pressure on the parade.
On the day it will put pressure on all of us, but I'm happy the way it's coming up.
One man determined to see it all come off to perfection, Warrant Officer Alan Pifke. He's retiring this month, but his troops will do him proud.
I think that after the Duke of Edinburgh sees my people parade, that he'll want to employ them all for his Grenadier Guards, because we're going to show them exactly how to do it.
The report, launched by the left-wing Evatt Foundation, argues that the government's free market policies are not working and that the unemployment crisis would be eased by a $2 billion program to provide more than 200,000 jobs almost immediately through local council programs. Dr Roy Green and 2 associates presented their paper in Sydney today. Back at the university this afternoon, Dr Green said there were good reasons why Prime Minister Keating should consider the proposal. The report also argues that the government should use import controls and export subsidies, as well as devaluing the Australian dollar, to overcome balance of payment problems which are holding back economic growth. The economists also want a more interventionist industrial policy to improve the international competitiveness of Australian firms.
Through their cooperation, as well as through competition, they gain export orders for Australian firms rather than lose them to gigantic firms overseas that would otherwise have the edge.
In short, the report is encouraged by moves already underway towards capital works employment schemes and industrial restructuring, but the whole process has been too timid, according to the economists. Whether Mr Keating will heed their advice remains to be seen. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
For the group visiting McWilliams Winery, first up chore was lunch and a chance to savour some local samplings. Next, the all-important tastings, 11 Semillons spread across 20 vintages. And what about our rating in the United Kingdom?
Pound for pound, dollar for dollar, it's the best value in Europe.
This reputation has seen Australian exports increase by 30% a year for the last few years. Last year, Australia exported more than 65 million litres, or $202 million worth of wine. Of that, some 18 million litres, or around 30%, went to the United Kingdom, making it our biggest single market. Through tours like this, local winemakers are intent on maintaining that level.
This is an example of local companies getting together and promoting wines overseas.
The Winemakers Federation of Australia has also formulated a plan to boost export markets. It's calling on the federal government for increased financial support to help promote our wines overseas on a united advertising front. Currently, that responsibility largely rests with the individual wine companies. Through the plan, the Federation believes it can help increase export earnings from $202 million to $1 billion in 5 years. Mr Ryan says that increase would benefit the entire community because winemaking involves all levels of industry, from primary with grape growing to manufacturing and then to selling. So any increase in demand for our wines means increased employment opportunities. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
"12-year-old Russell Forward, his dad Kim, brother Steve and friends Louise and Anna often comb the dunes of Stockton Beach in search of driftwood, shells and old bottles. From the trash, the sea occasionally deposits some treasure. Last year, Russell made an interesting discovery.
I seen a plastic tube just passed out of centre, picked it up, had 2 plastic corks in the end, so I pulled them out and I pulled out this bit of paper. I unrolled it and it was just blue writing and all the ink had run. And I took it up and I showed Dad and Louise and they had a look and it was some letter.
The weathered letter disintegrated on opening the bottle, but Russell managed to decipher an address in Holland. The Dutch Postal Service eventually tracked down the writer, now a 37-year-old bank officer, married with 2 children. He wrote back to Russell. When he was just 10 years old, the Dutchman had participated in a Red Cross-sponsored project where school children had filled in messages, sealed them in plastic tubes and tossed them from a tanker off the Dutch coast.
He was 10 and I was 12 and it's brought us together because he's only 2 years younger than me when he threw it in, and that's not very much because I could throw something in like now and someone else could find it and they could write to me. And
a tall tale but apparently true. Come to think of it, if the current is right, I should get this story back in time for the news.
The Hunter River is being choked by salt. Last year, readings at Jerry's Plains were dangerously high for at least 6 months.
800 is a safe reading. As you can see, on numerous occasions in the past year, it's exceeded that.
A major problem water resources face is ignorance of the issue. While many people appreciate problems in areas such as the Murray-Darling catchment, here in the Hunter, salinity is as bad, if not worse, than any river system in Australia. Parts of the Hunter were ancient seabeds, so salinity is a natural occurrence. But the experts fear the removal of trees for agriculture, water discharges from mining and sewage from towns could be adding to the problem.
If it goes unchecked, then sure, salinity levels of the level we got last year will have a very big impact on irrigation and the impact on livelihoods.
5 monitoring stations have been set up from Muswellbrook through to Greta, making daily checks on salt levels. A phone answering service was started today so farmers can check if it's safe to use the water for irrigation.
Salinity 676 microcents per centimetre. Hunter River at Penman.
Over the months ahead, Water Resources expect to highlight the main reasons for the salinity problems. An education program will follow, otherwise it'll get tough with polluters. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Since Newcastle lost the frigate's contract almost 3 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce has been monitoring Hunter Company's performance on the business frontier. To date, it hasn't been encouraging.
Of recent times that New Zealand, for example, has won a considerable share of the work, and it disappoints us that we in the Hunter aren't getting the share of work that perhaps we could get.
Mr Derwin fears the frigate's loss has left a sour taste.
It may be that a certain degree of apathy crept into it after that, and I think we've got to correct that now very, very quickly.
Mr Derwin says it's now time to take a constructive look at where we're going wrong, and the Chamber is offering to help. The Chamber's support would be in the form of advice or providing any relevant business contacts the company may need. The Chamber says it can also help sort out any problems with state government tendering requirements like payroll tax. Today, companies welcomed the offer. Also, the Chamber of Commerce has welcomed the news from BHP General Manager Paul Jeans that the company's Rod and Bar division would continue to operate in Newcastle. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
To some Madawi residents, sand mining and conservation are on opposite sides of the road. Their attitude was hardened last month when sand mining company RZM moved a dredge to a new site at Campvale and into a storm of protest. Prompted by that controversy, the opposing parties came together last night to discuss the pros and cons of sand mining. About 80 people attended the meeting, including representatives from RZM, residents, environmentalists and State MP Bob Martin. RZM's General Manager Bob Kelly explained to the gathering that the company is doing all it can to minimise environmental damage.
We've had to come up with a solution to dispose of these trees. We've tried to do it and use it as an environmental advantage.
But at times at the meeting, the divisions between the groups were evident. The motion originally put to the meeting proposed the formation of a group to oppose sand mining. Mr Kelly from RZM refused to go along with that motion, saying it was pushing towards putting his company out of business. The motion was reworded, calling for the formation of a group to work to minimise damage to habitat and wildlife by all human activities, not just sand mining. The meeting's organiser Ian McKenzie says he's disappointed by what he calls a diluted motion.
"48 teams competed in the event, making it Australia's largest and richest rugby sevens tournament. It attracted clubs such as Randwick, who won their way through to the final with a hard-fought 16-14 win over Sydney Fiji in the semi-final, and Gordon, who accounted for Sydney University 12-10 to set up a meeting with the Galloping Greens. Gordon were denied the first try, and then had to make some despairing tackles. But Gordon couldn't hold out the Greens any longer. Ahead 4-0 at the break, Lloyd Walker and Randwick took over in the second half, the rampaging centre scoring after good lead-up work. Again, Walker injected himself into the fray, with Gordon not able to stop the runaway train, the break leading to another Greens try. And Randwick capped off a fine series with another 4-pointer to seal the win. Final score, Randwick 22, Gordon 0. Sunny Arcade blitzed his rivals, Gold Dolphin grabbed second and a dead heat for third between Coppermite and In Power. At Tamworth last night, the Carlton Sire Stakes over 1,609 metres was the feature. Miss spent a great run, Fancy Me second and Power to Charm third. The fourth was the Carlton Maturity Stakes and an easy victory for Major Ty. Major Ty the winner from Cloudy Century and Kaz filled the other minor placing. The only thing triathletes could look forward to was the early morning dip, although even a 1 kilometre swim can take plenty out of you. Not much in it as they came out of the water, Stu Adams hitting the beach first and racing through to the changeover. Ahead a 30-kilometre bike ride on a fairly flat course conducive to high speeds. In this section, Mike Jerd made his move on his futuristic machine, grabbing a handy lead. As Jerd powered towards the final leg, many others could only look towards a lot more minutes on the course. Jodie Bowles had the women's event totally in control and was very relaxed as she cycled along at a steady pace. The run of 8.5 Ks would have finished most average athletes off, but for Jerd it was where he really stamped his authority, and he received generous applause as he finished in a time of 1 hour, 35.41 minutes, to win by only 39 seconds from Greg Stanmore, with early leader Stu Adams third, a further minute behind. No doubt about the ladies, Jodie Bowles winning by nearly 12 minutes, beating home many male competitors. At Maitland last night, the Carlton Inner City Pace was the feature. Tallerwood Pursuit sent out the favourite. Power Crazy started at 11 to 2, Tallerwood Pursuit at 5 to 2, and Kawara Power at 4s. At Riverview Park, the inaugural Lismore Workers 2LM Rugby League Sevens attracted around 1,200 spectators and a wealth of talent from all over the North Coast. South Lismore were impressive early, but went down in the consolation final. In the open final, Mullumbimby, who just shaded Ballina in the semi-final 24-10, went in against Kyogle. A great final ensured, and with time running out, Kyogle were able to score the match-winning try, running out victors by 18 points to 14. It started as an idea and blossomed into a full-blown sporting event. The scenery may have been spectacular, but there wasn't much time or inclination to take it in, as all comers beat up on the wall. The challenge? See who was the quickest over a 1.7 kilometre course from Nobby's car park to the end of the breakwall and back. That honour was to go to David Forbes, a renowned Australian middle distance athlete. But thousands packed the promenade to see their heroes from the national sporting teams, the Knights and the Breakers going head-to-head in Heat 1 of the 400-metre relay. First graders looked on happy to let the young pups flex their hamstrings, and the Knights won the first heat comfortably. Newcastle triathletes boss Stuart Allen grabbed victory on the line, but again it was the Winfield Cuppers and the National Soccer League team that squared off in the final. Although close, it was the Knights who reigned supreme, with Brian Russell, Tim Patterson, Wayne Richards and Robbie O'Davis vowing to leave the wall to Sarge, Chief, Boydie and Flash next year.
The plan to establish a Community Justice Council was aired at a public meeting held in Belmont last night. The aim is to provide a community-based management program with minor offenders being monitored by the community in consultation with police. In so doing, lessen the number and amount of time offenders spend in detention centres.
Under the Community Justice Council, they would be asked to negotiate with the community, with their parents alongside them or a significant other adult, as to what kind of things they might do to make good their offences.
This could involve compensating the community through service work or apologies to the victim. Mr Twyman says making young offenders whose crimes include shoplifting more accountable to the community serves two purposes.
To increase the young person's understanding of the consequences of their behaviour, that is to bring them both to their peer group and to the community. Secondarily, there is an issue of a cost-effective management of young offenders.
Locally, around 2,000 young offenders go through the formal justice system a year. It costs up to $50,000 annually to lock up each offender. For those on community probation, the bill averages $4,000. Mr Twyman believes the community-based management scheme would cost a tenth of that. A similar public meeting is scheduled for April. It's hoped the Community Justice Council will be established then. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
Drug squad operations in the Hunter have netted more than a fair share of the state's cannabis crops, and it's the drug shortages resulting from these raids which police say is leading to an increase in amphetamine abuse. Police have smashed several alleged speed laboratories in the region, but are convinced others are operating in strict secrecy. While it's unlikely that Operation Noah will crack the big operations, police believe smaller pieces of information could achieve the same result.
And once we get some sound intelligence in that direction, we can then perhaps backtrack and find out where that amphetamine came from.
Unlike elsewhere in Australia, Newcastle hasn't had the same noticeable increases in other hard drugs, especially the trendier brands like ecstasy or LSD.
Whilst there is an availability of LSD and hard drugs in this town, I don't know whether it's because of the recession or hard times, it is not as prevalent as what it has been in past years.
It's expected that information received on the Operation Noah hotline will be broken down in Sydney for Newcastle Police to analyse within 2 weeks. Tom Hilston, NBN News.
It was a long way from the Sydney Entertainment Centre, the Glass House and other celebrated venues in the National Basketball League, but the Cessnock Stadium, jammed to the rafters, made nearly as much noise as the fans cheered on their respective teams. A depleted Kings outfit was able to settle quicker than the Falcons, who were having their first serious hit out of the new season. New point guard Everett Stevens impressed early on and combined well with Paul Kuiper to add further points. And although the Falcons' defence went missing for most of the night, at times it came off with good results. The Falcons led by 2 at quarter time, the Kings by 9 at the long break and 1 at 3/4 time, and finally the Kings easily by 11. But it's early days and there's no panic at Broadmeadow.
Well, we need improvement in a lot of areas, but specifically the defensive end is where we've got to concentrate on some basic principles. We weren't really watching the ball and getting away from our team defense where we're helping out. So we'll just cover that. And we're not worried about last night's game, really. We just got to get back and make sure the guys understand what we want.